Hi guys and welcome back to my channel. Now today we have Topping DX5. It's one of the latest Toppings products and it's a combined DAC/headphone amp, the same as recently reviewed SMSL M500 MKII for example, and that one surprised me a lot because it was complete overachiever and it managed to surpass some standalone DACs. And I didn't expect that because it was 2-in-1 unit, and now we have a basically same type of device just coming from Topping at the exact same price point too, $450 US. So this will be interesting because, yeah, I will be comparing it directly to that SMSL because it's only normal, right? So let's just clear this first. Connectivity is really nice. It has 3 types of digital inputs, meaning USB, coaxial, and optical. And yes, there is Bluetooth on board here. I will not go into details about Bluetooth. I don't consider that to be a proper high-fidelity connection. It's okay for convenience. As always, I just try it out to see if it works, if everything is okay there. I don't spend much time testing it because it's always inferior to any sort of wired digital connection, and that's just it, at least for now. And when it comes to analog outputs, we have both single-ended RCAs as well as balanced XLRs, like normal XLR connectors, not those tiny 4.4 or something like that. This way we can have proper cables like these. And important to mention that you can adjust the volume on both of these, so if you wish you can use this as a small preamp. It's not great in that your system will benefit if you have a high quality dedicated preamp that's doing that attenuation job and providing power amp with higher voltage, with higher energy than the DAC can do. But if you wish to do so, if you need maybe to do so for a short period of time, you have it. And lastly, there is a headphone output in the front. We have again 2 types of connectors. One is 6.25mm single-ended and the other one is XLR single-ended. Yes, it's not balanced, it's here just for convenience. If your headphones have this type of connector, if you want to use it for any reason, you can, but amplifier inside of this is single-ended. So the DAC circuitry itself is balanced. You have balanced outputs back here in form of XLRs, but when it comes to headphone amp, it's single-ended no matter what connection you're using. And the display in front is of OLED type, it's monochromatic, it's quite readable, it's nice and clear if you use it like this in a desktop environment, but if you're sitting on a couch and looking from like few meters afar, you basically don't see anything, and that's okay, like most DACs behave that way. And there is a small remote control. It's this small plastic thing that usually comes with Toppings and SMSLs and some other Chinese manufacturers. It's not a thing of luxury really, but it does the job. You just have to aim straight into the unit because it's not really sensitive, but again, it does the job. And one important thing, at least for me really, is that you can turn the display off. Basically, you can set auto off, and after some time when you don't tinker with the device or do anything with it, it will go off. And other than that, there is not much to play with here really. You have a choice of 3 different digital filters for PCM, and lastly you can switch gain mode for headphone output. There's low and there's high. I'll just quickly get over with that. I really preferred low gain mode because it was more transparent one, more detailed sounding, quicker, and with more texture. High gain mode still sounds very good, but it does add something to the sound. You might even like that. It's some sort of energy and bite and oomph, but the cost is losing some fine texture and the quickest transients and the smallest of details. But again, I'm not judging. If you have some sort of too analytical or dry sounding headphones, going to the high mode can actually give you that juice that you need and maybe mellow edges and details a little bit, and you might even prefer that. But for me, and most of the things that I will say about it going forward, I'm talking about low gain mode, that's still very powerful. I didn't have any problems driving anything, including some lazy planar headphones, and it just provided really nice and incisive sound. Now, controlling the unit, it's easy to adjust the volume and switch inputs, but it's a little bit tricky when it comes to some more advanced functions. Some of those include double clicks, and sometimes I miss the speed to do a double click, so I change inputs accidentally instead. So yeah, it's functional, and the more you use it, the more you get used to it, but you know, using one knob and one button for everything, it does get a little bit cramped and finicky at times, but using a remote control, everything is just straightforward, and it's a good thing we get it. Now, I really don't want to bother you much with tech specs, because that's not what reviewing this product is about, at least for me. I'll just quickly mention that it uses Sabre DAC chip. Actually, I think it uses two of them, and it measures great as usual for topping. Headphone amplifier is really powerful at like 1.8 watts into 32 ohms. That decreases slowly as you use higher impedance headphones. That's normal, that's true for every amp. But in general, there's a lot of power here, and I never felt that I'm missing anything with it. File support is just perfect. You have really high resolution PCM, insanely high DSD, MQA even, if you care about that lossy compression. And again, if you know anything about topping and similar manufacturers, they'll give you basically everything that you could ever need and then some, just for bragging. When have you ever seen a 768 kHz PCM file? Nobody publishes real albums and real music in such high resolutions. It's just like, no. And that leads us to the heart of every review, which is, how does it sound? And because I'm sitting here at my desktop where I started testing it, I'll first talk about headphone output. And this is not an afterthought. This headphone amp on DX5 is really something. So if you want a DAC and a headphone amp, and you're thinking like, yeah, I'm so over these two-in-one units, I have some sort of stack, or I plan to buy some sort of stack, please don't be hasty. First thing that I've noticed is it really does sound energetic, and there's just every note, everything that you play sounds fast, and it has energy, it has kick and attack, and I'm really happy about that because I know that topping can produce really high resolution sound, and I know they can produce technically accomplished sound, but having this sort of energy and kick and just fun sound is not a given. If something measures really well, it doesn't mean that it sounds energetic and engaging, but this one really does. And it's doing that by still being what topping is known for, like resolution is extremely high, detail retrieval is top-notch. Any little squeak or moving fingers over some sort of strings on a string instrument, or tiny details like singer opening mouth, or anything similarly silent and subtle happening in the vicinity of the microphone will be heard through this unit. And I quickly realized, man, this sounds really, really great. There's a lot of air, there's a lot of width in the soundstage. I feel that space is good, that layering is great. It's not really a full and juicy sounding DAC, but it's not flat either. It's just quick, nimble, energetic, and really resolving. And I immediately wanted to compare it to everything else that I already own and know how it sounds. So I first compared it directly to SMSL M500 MKII, which is right there in my main room setup. I just didn't want to disconnect everything so I can just hold it here, but it's right there. And there is no point of beating around the bush here. Topping DX5 is a better DAC and headphone amp when it's used with the headphones. SMSL M500 is quite good on its own in isolation, and both of these actually have similar kind of tonality. They're not warm and juicy sounding, they're highly detailed, quick and speedy, but topping DX5 puts everything on a slightly higher level. It's upping things up a notch with even more clarity, even more energy, better kick, better punch. And while SMSL M500 MKII never feels low resolution and not resolving, because it really is, compared to this topping, sometimes it can sound a little bit mild with attack and with energetic edges, and just less lively and slightly less resolving. It has really decent amount of speed and details and everything, but it doesn't do that with authority and with intent and kick that DX5 has. And I was really blasted with that type of sound fidelity coming from a 2-in-1 unit costing $450. Next, I quickly asked my friend to bring his topping E50 L50 stack that I don't have with me anymore, and unfortunately for him, we both liked DX5 better. E50 L50 stack is really good, it even sounds smoother, it's less edgy, and some might prefer that because it's smoother, it's probably easier listen, especially for some sort of background listening while you're working or something like that. But when I'm actually just sitting and listening to the music, I find DX5 more resolving, a little bit quicker in transients, in changing pace. It has more energy overall, it hits harder, it's making me nod my head and tap my feet with rhythm and with music, and that especially goes for something fast-paced, for example, like this. It just infuses your music with energy, and again, there is no sense beating around the bushes. If you have E50 L50 stack, it's a perfectly good stack. You don't need to upgrade to this immediately because I just said I like it more. But if you're currently on the market and if you're thinking like, well, that stack, when you combine these two and when you add a linear power supply to E50 to actually bring the most out of it, it's more expensive than this. And it doesn't perform better. So lastly, it was inevitable. I compared it to my favorite topping D30 Pro A30 Pro stack, which kept being my main stack for headphone setup here at my desktop environment from the moment I got it. Because this stack has energy, it has grunt, it can drive everything, it's not fussy about headphones, and that stack is somewhere around $750 when put together. To my surprise, this $450 DX5 sounds as good. to my ears it sounds even a little bit better. Yeah, it's tough to say. It's just yeah, something that was so good and that I recommended so much to everybody around me. Now I have to come out and say like, hey, you know that one that I just 2 months ago I told you, you cannot get better than that. Yes, it costs a little bit more than your average 2-in-1 device, but it has power, it has drive, it's like end game product. And I still think it is, but at the moment you can buy the same level of performance for less money, and it will even slightly surpass this stack in terms of having more resolution and having quicker bass, speedier transients, and a little bit more energetic edges, and slightly more extended high frequencies. It's that good. So again, I quickly inserted DX5 just as a DAC instead of D30 Pro, and realized that that sound was really mighty good, equally good as DX5 alone, meaning that A30 Pro is a mighty good amplifier, whereas D30 Pro is actually a part of this stack that is a limiting factor, that is dragging the performance of this stack just a little bit down, because it does sound full, it sounds natural, but it does not have resolving power of DX5. D30 Pro's resolution is not as high, its speed, its attack, its energy is not fully comparable to DX5, which is simply a better DAC. So if you put DX5 as a DAC to A30 Pro, that sounds better than D30 Pro and A30 Pro. But it doesn't make much sense because the amp inside of DX5 is equally good. But that encouraged me to test it more as a DAC only, and for that I moved it to my room setup, because I really think that DACs show biggest differences in a speaker setup. That way I hear much more of a soundstage, width, depth, separation, things like that. If you follow my channel regularly, you probably know that just recently I was amazed by SMSL M500 MKII, and after testing I actually kept it in my room setup. I sold my Danafrips RS2, which was with me longer than a year, so I'm really amazed by M500 MKII. So I disconnected that one, connected DX5 into the system, and realized, first of all, it's really high resolution DAC. It has so much details that you can hear, and that's equally true no matter what part of the frequency spectrum we are talking about. Bass is quick, it's just fast-paced, it starts and stops on a dime. It has plenty of texture. If you're listening to a string bass instrument, you'll hear string vibrating, you'll hear the texture of that tone instead of some just blobby, weighty boom. You hear like ding, string doing its thing. Mid-range is again filled with details. If you want to hear texture from vocals, there's plenty of it. If you want to hear all of those tiny, textury, crunchy details from any kind of instrument or effect in a movie, you'll hear it. And it's just laid bare in front of you. You don't even need to try to hear that. Highs, well extended. There's a lot of air. There's a lot of width, which is not always a given for a Sabre DAC. So I'll immediately move to comparison with M500. It does sound wider and airier than M500. It feels like those crunchy and textury and sandy details that are enriching every tone. It feels like those are more forward, there is more presence in that upper mid-range section, and I would say that DX5 is just more detail-oriented DAC. But M500 MKII has fuller lower mid-range and punchier mid-bass. That does a lot of great things to the music. First of all, when I listen to vocals, I'm always focused on their body and their presence and palpability just in between my speakers. And it sounds so natural and so lifelike with M500 MKII. With DX5 here, vocals are still present and well focused, firmly located in the center, but they're not as full and as palpable. I don't feel that I can get up and just bite a singer. Okay, this came out wrong, but you probably know what I mean. With M500 MKII, vocals just feel gummy. Same goes for every other instrument that has a lot of body and a lot of that chesty type of sound. SMSL just does that better, it feels more palpable, and even though the whole sound stage feels wider and more airy with DX5, individual tones feel more 3D, like they have more of a body and more of three-dimensionality with M500 MKII. And its soundstage, M500's, is slightly narrower, but inside of that soundstage everything feels more palpable, whereas DX5 creates wider area, but kinda thinner, a little bit more 2D soundstage. To be perfectly candid here, I definitely prefer what M500 MKII is doing to the sound, at least in my system and with my components, with my speakers. It just feels more physical. I do know that in some systems DX5 would probably impress some listeners more, because I don't know, if you just have big fatty speakers moved to the corners and you have a lot of boom in your systems or just fatty sounding gear in your system, this might cut through that and just give you more of that quick, energetic transients and edges, and it might suit your system really well, because objectively those are on a similar level quality-wise, but I just prefer tonality, the full lush tonality of M500 MKII. So between these two, I'd give headphone amplifier and headphone performance to topping DX5. I think it just sounds livelier, more energetic, it resolves better. Whereas as a DAC, just DAC only, connected to another integrated amp, preamp, something like that, I still prefer M500, and I'm still going to recommend that one as my favorite. And moving forward, just because I spent so much time explaining the differences between M500 MKII and DX5 as a DAC, you already probably realized that this is a really good sounding DAC. And if I would to compare it with something like topping E50, I think it's better. Even E50 with a linear power supply, that would again sound smoother, but this one is more resolving, it has more attack, more impact, and I would choose this for my system. Similar story with topping D30 Pro. It has fuller bassline, it has more laid back, maybe more retracted mid-range, it resembles to R2R sound, but in general its speed, its edges are not as clean and crisp, its resolution is not equal to DX5. So again, I would prefer DX5. The only thing you need to think about is if this kind of really energetic, really upper mid-range forward, texture forward, crunchy and husky, details forward type of sound is good for you, and is it a good match for your system. If it is, it's a mighty good sounding DAC if you only use it as a DAC, not to mention absolutely great headphone amp. So I think it matches and surpasses most of like $400 DACs. And with that, I'll basically just stop talking right now, and I'll conclude that this is absolutely astonishing desktop device if you are going to use it with headphones. I cannot think of anything costing this much that sounds as good, and as I mentioned, in my opinion, it slightly surpassed A30 Pro D30 Pro combo. As a DAC, yeah, we covered that already. It's really, really good. Not my favorite tonality, but nonetheless, it's really, really good. Lots of absolutely astonishing devices coming out to the market lately, and I'm so happy about that. So that would be all for today, guys. Thank you for watching, and see you next time. Bye.